Good evening and welcome to Ridgecrest Talk. This is the Thursday night edition, and this is going to be part one of two parts. We have with us a special guest, a return guest, Mike Neill. Thanks for being with us, Mike.
Thanks for
having me. Thank you very much, Mike, for coming in.
And we're going to talk about, what do you think we should talk about?
Water.
Water?
Water.
Amazing.
You prepared to talk about water?
Oh, always.
Okay.
I love water.
We had a couple of recent meetings that we can talk about.
Yes.
We had the Planning Commission making their second attempt trying to send a letter to the Kern County Planning Commission
Yes.
in support of what the Planning Department is proposing with their land management proposal. And then we had another meeting Monday, and I don't remember what committee that was. Do you?
It's like the water.
Ad hoc water conservation.
City Ad hoc Water Committee?
Yeah.
Water conservation.
Water
committee.
conservation.
Jim Sanders is head of
chair.
it. Yes.
And the mayor was present also, along with a multitude of the public. The water district manager, Don Zadiba, was there. There was a planning or a water board member, Chuck Griffin was
Jeff
there.
Grip, yes.
And
Corticciato was there.
what's his last name?
Corticciato, Don Corticciato, I believe.
Don Corciato.
Corciato.
However you
It's
pronounce
always
it.
a hard name for me to pronounce. I'm
Yes.
sorry, Don.
Yeah. Forgive us.
Those were some of the dignitaries, I might say, or notable persons that were at the meeting, including, of course, our own Robert Eierman. He was
Yeah,
there.
right.
But again, the discussion of water. And what I found interesting, you were there also, right?
Yes.
What I found interesting, they threw this chart out at part of the discussion at that meeting Monday, trying to determine how much water is being utilized in the city parks, of which there are, they said four.
Four. They said four, yes.
I think there's more than four, but we'll say four. And what they did, they only have a meter on one of the parks, Pearson Park.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
And so then they took how many gallons was being pumped there, divided it by the number of acres. And
Acres
it
of
came out to
Pearson
like
Park.
4.5 per acre.
Yes.
And then they multiplied that times all the acreage,
Of the
parks
parks.
acreage that we have, and tried to contend that's what was being used by the city.
Yes, which came out to just under 392 acre feet per year.
Well, I had a problem with that because the sports facilities pump more water than just a regular park.
Yes.
That's
Time-
probably true.
Anytime they have activity on the field, they water it so that the grass doesn't get
Yeah.
killed. So, and what I'm getting at here, just like the county with their Land Management Act or
Land
the
Use Management Plan.
the EIR, particularly that was based off of, they're throwing numbers out there that just aren't accurate. They aren't true.
Correct.
And then they decide to make a decision on, what is the old adage with computers?
Garbage in, garbage out.
And that's what we're seeing, you know? So, what were your observations of that meeting?
That on that particular subject, I was just looking at the chart, the graph that they supplied, and the discussion, thinking they might as well just drop the subject. They don't even know how much water they're using. If they want to know, they need to go put meters on their wells and then send people around and read them periodically. This is unfortunately pretty typical of how they conduct some of these things in the city. They decide that, we want to get some info, and so they'll cobble together something like this, and it's either inaccurate or incomplete or both. and then they've got to be pounded on by, members of the public to tell them that, well, go get it right before you start trying to make decisions about what you're going to do.
Right.
And this is another example of that. And I hate to, say this because I appreciate, the some of the people that went out and went after the data, and they're kind and respectful of the public and all this, but they need to do their job completely, and then sit down and try to start talking about what they're going to do about the situation.
Yeah, and to be somewhat fair, this was asked for as a rough estimate. It was, to my understanding, this was not supposed to be a detailed analysis or come up with a hard, fast number. This was just kind of get us in the ballpark of the water that we use. It's a shame that we have to be here, or the city has to be here at this point to be concerned about this amount of use of water. I'm not sure that this is what the members of the community wanted when they cried very loudly about the, to put it in their terms, the terrible farmers who are just out there making money and sucking the valley dry.
Yeah, just pumping water all over the place.
Yeah, all over the place, yeah. And
of course, we know that not to be true. If you go back and look on YouTube, the interview we had with the pistachio farmer, excuse me, Tom Conaway, and he discussed it briefly while he was on air with us.
yes.
But I think more so off air, to the degree he goes to conserve water.
Yes.
And he just doesn't start pumping water and letting it run for, an hour. All those trees are, the watering is metered, measured, and he puts no more water on there than needs to be. And he talked also about there are like almost 5-6 months out of the year
Yeah.
he's not using any water.
Right. In fact, it's 6 or 7 months out of the year that he
Okay.
doesn't use any water. And all of his efforts to reduce water, but at the same time not reduce his crop.
Right.
And and he feels he can save almost 50% of what he's currently using. And we have to, as is always the case, go to break. We'll be back after the break with more. Join us.
Well, welcome back. Again, we're here with Mike Neill talking about water and some of the recent meetings, and we were talking about the recent city meeting, ad hoc committee on conservation, water conservation. And in relation to that, the water district came out, I guess, I didn't see it, you did, about how they were going to have to conserve something up to 35%?
Yes.
Read?
Wow.
The rules aren't set yet by the California Water Resources Board, but in response to the governor's 25% conservation required, impossible goal, but okay, the Water Resources Board is looking at implementing that, and they have established, I think, 165 gallons per person per day as the desired rate. We use like 244 gallons per person per day, and that puts us in the higher usage bracket. And the higher usage bracket has to conserve by 35%, the normal usage bracket by 20% or 25%, and the low use bracket by only 10%.
So what that's going to mean is they're going to cut off your coolers every other day. You can only take a shower once a week. You can only brush your teeth with the water on momentarily, and then you have to turn it off. Clothes you can only wash once a week. No, I'm kidding. But I mean, how are they going to conserve 35%?
I have no idea. I saw on the Indian Wells Valley Forum a lady, I think her name was, it doesn't matter what her name is, showing her water bill, and the usage was like $1.53 worth of water. Arsenic charge $11 almost, and the ready-to-serve fee almost $30. But I don't know, how does something like that conserve?
I don't know. How do they get these water rates too? Now, we haven't talked about this a lot, but I'll bring it up. There was a recent ruling, it was a case that went back ways, but on tiered water rates in California?
Yes, it came out of San Luis Obispo, and the, I guess, first level judge, let's call it, declared tiered water rates as unconstitutional, a violation of Prop 218, and that they just cannot have that. What they have to do is charge for the water that is delivered at a uniform rate, no matter what the usage is.
Being quite honest with the district, they do charge that.
Huh?
Well, you said that she got a bill that said how much water she was charged
yes,
for.
she was. That's true. But for those people who use more water, there's a increase, a huge increase in the cost per gallon or per unit of water. And I find it fascinating that the governor wants more of this instituted, and yet it's already been declared unconstitutional. Now, agreed, it's probably going to go to the appellate level and maybe even to the Supreme Court of California. But the indications are there.
Well, what I see with this whole water issue, somebody's going to be making some money over this. And those that have passed the bar are going to get pretty rich.
Very rich.
Very rich. My vision of the attorneys of California is they're sitting around a table drooling and rubbing their hands in anticipation.
We both picked up on the last city council meeting where planning director Lorelei Alviat gave her presentation to the city council.
Yes.
And the city attorney piped in.
Yes.
And brought up some litigation questions having to do with property rights. And it was just interesting. Like you say, it was almost like he was drooling at the mouth in anticipation of the county doing this. Not necessarily for him, but maybe some buddies of his.
Right. I almost felt that he had a Cheshire Cat grin on his face when in less than 2 minutes he tied the county legally into knots. And the only response that the county had was to fall back on CEQA and that kind of thing. But that's not going to work in court.
I don't think so.
No.
And what we're talking about here is the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution guarantees that nobody will be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. The 14th Amendment carries that down to the states and lower governments. And the courts have consistently ruled that when you deprive someone of the intended use they had for that property, that is, in essence, taking the property, and clearly not allowed. And what is going on now with the public hearings and everything, although nice, is not due process. So it seems to me that it's just going to be so straightforward that any landowner whose property was changed is primed to file a lawsuit against the county. And I just don't see how the county is going to win. And so, I think that the attorneys are standing in line. In fact, I think they feel that this is going to be so lucrative that they'll probably take the first case or two on contingency.
Yeah.
Well, I would expect some lawyer to actually step up and offer his services in a class action kind of a suit on behalf of all these property owners in the Inyakern area because, you know, I think what the county was part of their strategy, and, you know, they would deny this, and this may be a bad guess, but what they did was they didn't go after the big agriculture users. They went after the small property owners, probably thinking that, well, they're not going to sue us and they're not going to give us a hard time because they're just a bunch of individuals. But if they all bind together as a group and go find a lawyer, there's more than enough properties affected out there for them to file a class action lawsuit.
Against another hard break here. So please join us after the break. We'll have more discussion.
Welcome back. This is the last segment of part 1 tonight. And you should be heading down to the city right about now.
Yes.
For the County Planning Commission meeting that's going to be going on at 6 o'clock. So just a reminder to you. We were talking about conservation, and one thing also that the district already said that they're going to be implementing is a watering every other day type of thing, isn't it?
Yes, I believe.
Odd days for watering.
Yes, and I think that's also in response to the governor saying that unless you have a specific plan, then our plan comes in of watering twice a week. We all know that won't work here. Mm-hmm. So I'm not even sure that every other day will work, but that's what the proposal is.
I have several neighbors where it'll work fine for them.
It will?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're zero-scape.
Okay. Yes, well, that...
The rest of us, we will become zero-scape.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you'll become that awful brown lawn person.
I'm just kind of wondering what this Freedom Park and some of the other parks are going to look like, the ball fields.
Yes.
They'll stay green.
How would that be possible, watering every other day?
Government always finds a way to exempt itself from its own rules. You know that.
Yeah.
Well, so anyway, getting back, and I hope we can wrap this up in this last segment, getting back to that city meeting on water conservation, the main reason we went down there Monday was to hear from City Attorney Wayne Lemieux. He gave a presentation on the Water Sustainability Act and
yes, and the GSAs are
GSAs
yes,
or GMAs.
He calls them GMAs. Yeah.
Right. That's the Groundwater Management Agency or Groundwater Sustainability Agency are going to operate. And that was pretty interesting.
Yes.
I don't know that I agreed with everything he had to say. And I don't, being a good lawyer, I don't think he played all his cards. He kept some close to the vest.
I think so, yes.
The one item that I know I disagreed with was the mayor brought this up because I was the one that brought it up at a previous meeting, that if there was litigation in one of the groundwater basins prior to the GSAs or GMAs coming on board, if there's litigation that's been instituted or begun, that will keep the GSAs from doing anything. Because the GSAs are essentially going to be a legislative body.
Yes.
And litigation is over in the other branch. It's a judicial issue. So how can you legislate when you have a judicial issue sitting there waiting to be decided?
Yeah. Well, the most I don't have an answer for you, not being an attorney, and it also doesn't make sense.
Do you agree with me that the likelihood of the GSA doing anything if there's litigation begun?
I think their hands will be tied.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so, and I think he knows that, and I believe that's one of the probably several reasons that he said several times throughout the talk that it was going to take several years for these entities to be put in place. Mm-hmm. That these things are going to have to get worked out while the lawyers all get nice and rich and all this, and then they'll finally work their way through it. But one thing that I caught that he said that I disagree with completely, and I believe this is probably the standard lawyer's position and certainly the standard court's position, and it's an underlying fundamental understanding of the state versus the people is what at some point, and I think a couple of times he said, well, the state owns the water. The people own the property, but the state owns the water underneath the property. And that's a wrong assumption. It's the kind of thing I was telling some people last night. It's not a conclusion you come to if you look at our basic constitution framework of our laws and you exegete from that and figure out what needs to be done. It's the kind of conclusion that comes from these faulty court precedent cases that all the lawyers like to build their cases off of. And it's precedent law, and precedent law can be based on a bunch of bad decisions. Just because it's a precedent doesn't mean that it was the right decision, but that's what they base it on. And this is where this opinion that the state owns the water comes from. But you have to ask yourself the question, what is the state?
Last I checked, it was the people.
Yes. But
they don't view it that way.
In this viewpoint, it's some entity that sits up higher than the people,
right,
and tells them what they're going to do with their property. And I think that's inherently, basically wrong and flawed.
It is.
There's some parts of the Constitution that actually claim that, though.
The California Constitution or the federal?
California. That the water belongs to the state, but then you have a little bit of a conflict, particularly when it states that property owners have the right to use the water underneath them for beneficial and reasonable use.
Yes.
So, and the only caveat or the hole that you could drive a truck through is when the court gets into trying to define reasonable.
Yes, and,
exactly.
And it, sometimes the citizen certainly determines what's reasonable. Somebody might disagree with that and take them to court, and then it puts it in the court's hand to determine if the use or the diversion methods or whatever we're talking about are reasonable. But I think it would be a very difficult position to take that even here in the desert, that growing food is unreasonable. I don't think you can get there.
No.
Speaking of the Planning Commission, we have a little bit of insight of some interesting information that's going to be shared tonight. We won't talk about it here, but you need to be down there. There's going to be some really explosive information shared with that Planning Commission.
Yes.
Real explosive.
Good.
So,
there.
This whole thing, the Water Sustainability Act of last year and the county's land management plan, I think are both heading directly to court as soon as action is taken by either of those.
As soon as it's ripe, as they say in the legal world, yes.
The lawyers can't do anything until there's some action.
Until there's some action, until there's some harm, until there is.
Right.
Yes. But, oh, wow.
All right, we got to go. Stay tuned for part 2 and join us.
Welcome back to part 2 of our discussion with Mike Neill on water. And remember, you're listening to Ridgecrest Talk right here on KZGN-TV. Where were we, gentlemen?
Talking about water.
That's true. I meant a little more specific.
And I had mentioned in part 1, one of the meetings we attended, and that was the city's planning commissioner's second attempt to forward a letter of support.
Yes, to the Kern
and we all
County
attended
Planning
that.
Commission.
Yes.
Yes.
And like I said, it was their second attempt. The first attempt We got them to table it.
Yes.
Convinced them to table it, to reconsider. And at the second meeting, shall I say, author
Yes.
of the letter
Yes, yes.
wasn't present, but the city manager was.
Yes, that which was unusual.
Right.
So was the mayor.
And the mayor.
And the mayor. And the city manager tried to convince the commissioners that what they were proposing to do was unprecedented, and recommended that they not do it, reconsider. And the mayor more or less reiterated, that she wished they'd reconsider because the city has not come to their opinion, the city council had not come to their opinion as far as whether they were going to oppose or support in a letter.
Right,
and didn't want to be in conflict.
Yes,
Right.
that, and they explained to the planning commission that they report to the council, and that they really shouldn't be going outside of that to address the planning commission, even though
Exactly.
they felt that it was appropriate to do. And when that was explained to them repeatedly, they just didn't get it, didn't want to get it, whatever it was, and they argued vehemently until I think the mayor's offhand comment, which I won't repeat, was made, and then I guess that convinced them that maybe they...
Well, I think when I read this from the city's website on what the job of the planning commission is, I think that kind of stung them too.
I completely agree.
And the city website, if you go under the departments or government, and then click on city planning commission, there's a part of describing what the planning commission does. It says the planning commission has a variety of duties, including the review and recommendation of land use policy to the City Council, not to the planning department of the county.
Right.
But yeah, I was kind of amazed at their continued position that it was okay for them to go ahead and send this letter to the county.
Yes.
Yeah. And a letter that they never asked for, that they didn't author.
Oh, that's
that was
true.
handed to them by the city planner, Matthew Alexander. It was his composure of the letter, and then just because it got put before them, they seemed to just all of a sudden think that, well, we need to pursue this. And I pointed this out at both meetings, two separate times, and told them quite honestly that I thought that, Mr. Alexander was trying to kind of lead them by the nose and get them to support an agenda that he was supportive of, even though they were looking at sending a letter in support of a plan that wasn't even complete, that hadn't even been submitted yet.
Right, at that time.
They were talking at the last meeting about, we got to get this out tomorrow because so there's some deadline we have to meet, and yet the staff report being submitted to the county planning commission isn't happening until tonight, and wasn't available to even look at until April the 3rd. And this meeting was what date? April
2nd?
2nd.
Yes.
The day before. And they want to support something that they didn't even know what it was, essentially. Simply because Mr. Alexander said, here, support this letter and send it to the County Planning Commission.
And
I thought that was
just
completely
a
out of
couple
line.
planning commissioners that were,
With the
hard set in doing this.
It was all of them.
5 of them.
Well, actually, Solomon, sorry, Solomon, I cannot pronounce your last name, so I'll not even try. Solomon was not there.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But the others, I was amazed at what I considered to be their lack of understanding of their duties and of their purview, and that they felt so compelled to go around the city council. I'm amazed.
Well, they may have learned this from the city council, unfortunately, because this is typical of city council meetings. I've never one time in the 8+ years I've been attending city council meetings and trying to watchdog what's going on, seeing the city council not do something that the staff recommended to them. They rubber stamp everything that's put forward to them, regardless. And I've argued time and time and time again, this you don't need to spend the money, this is not necessary, this isn't unconstitutional, or whatever the case was, and it really didn't matter at all. It was handed to them, they justified it, maybe they modify it slightly in about maybe 10% or less of the cases, and then they pass it on.
Yep.
So the council really shouldn't complain very much because they do this regularly.
Well, okay.
So anyway, at that meeting, they finally were convinced or swayed to readdress the letter. The letter stayed intact, except instead of being addressed to the County Planning Commission, it was addressed to the City Council.
Yes. They didn't have much interest in modifying the letter based upon any input that was given to them by citizens. They did make a couple of corrections, and one where they gave in and said that the basin was in critical overdraft, and they added per the Todd report,
Right.
words to that effect.
Right.
But they would not listen to the fact that the California Water Resources Board says we're in moderate
Overdraft.
I mean,
And our basin, if you go to the Water Resource website, they have maps there showing the basins. Ours doesn't even show up on the map that I looked at on that website.
well, that's right.
I would give them credit,
It's time
though.
for us to go to a break,
Okay.
unfortunately. So
Hold that
join us.
thought.
We'll be back in just a few seconds with more.
And welcome back to our second portion of part 2, along with Mike Neill. I'm Robert Eierman, along with my partner Al Huey, and we're talking water as usual. You were about to say something when we had to go to break.
Yes, I do, not want to fall prey to just being totally critical of everything that goes on. I want to give the City Planning Commission members credit for listening. They did listen. They changed their approach to what they were going to do. They decided to send the letter forward, but to the council, and with the statement that the council can, they can forward it on to the county. They can throw it in the trash can. They can modify it. They can, do what they want at it. It took a lot of pushback by a number of citizens and even the mayor and the city manager to overcome the bureaucratic inertia inherent in the whole system. But they did change and took us fairly reasonable position. I thought they should have just dropped the whole thing altogether, but at least they're leaving it to the elected representatives of Ridgecrest to forward something like this on to the county.
Now, I can't remember. Were there any of the commissioners that had not read the full land management plan that the...
Not at this meeting. They all indicated that they had spent and done their due diligence and had read the...
particularly, Volume 2, Chapter 3, right?
Yes. They certainly indicated that they had read it. I'm always surprised at the elected officials' response to these things when it has been stated repeatedly that relative to the current water usage, this plan does nothing.
Right.
relative to the future, well, maybe it could have an impact. And the heavy reliance on the Todd report, which was also evident there at the Planning Commission, that always amazes me that this is so bought into,
Right.
a debate that's been going on in this valley for 50 years.
Yeah.
And
they don't bother looking at any other data
Right.
so often because of what the county's trying to do right now. They just look at this Todd report and go, look,
yeah,
That's it.
must be gospel,
Yep,
you know?
yep. That's how they
This
take
whole plan, in my opinion, is an absolute pig. And the county planning department, Lorelei Oviatt, they have done a marvelous job at responding to people's input. But it doesn't matter. I mean, you're still putting a fancy dress, nice high heels, and lipstick on a pig.
Or
The
a
bottom
tractor.
line is it's still a pig. And it's absolutely should not go forward, and hopefully we have a few opportunities here to prevent it from going forward.
Tonight's one of them. If you're not down at City Hall, you should be.
Yes. But to do this and to take, in my opinion, take away people's property rights is just heinous. I mean, to me, it's like saying, oh, we've got a massive drug problem, which everybody that I've ever heard in Ridgecrest says we've got a massive drug problem. Well, let's solve it. I can solve it real easily. We will simply suspend the Fourth Amendment. There is no more unlawful search and seizure. The authorities can enter any building, any house, at any time for any reason, and we'll stop the problem. But that's a solution that's worse than the problem.
Right.
Yep.
And this is the same kind of thing, that they are so willing to violate the Constitution and rob people's rights because they're the government and they know better. I find it absolutely reprehensible.
And for a non-solution.
Yes, and for a
It
non-solution.
solves nothing. They've admitted to it numerous times. So it's unbelievable that they think that there's a necessity to do this, and you have to think there's something going on. There's other reasons that are not being stated for this, but nobody's figured it out yet.
Right, there's something that doesn't smell right. And we have our own supervisor. I don't know if I can ever forgive him for doing this to us, but he's even said, we're not running out of water anytime soon. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The manager of the water district, Don Zadeba, although definitely we have a concern, he said, we're not running out of water anytime soon. So what is this push?
I thought I read something that the Navy published in 2012. It was an EIR report.
Yes.
And they said we had, if we were prudent, 160 years?
That's
of water?
correct. Which reiterates what the water district, what the mayor, what the Navy.
It goes back to the 2005 BRAC, right?
Right, and in which they all swore under penalty of perjury that the data that they presented was accurate and correct. And oh, I see our next guest is here. Oh. Well, hi, Guy. Glad to have you. What is it that you would like to talk about?
Unscheduled guest.
And they said that we have 160 years. DCN 93, bear with me here. Oh, I can't find DCN 90.
Oh, that's my coffee. You can't have that.
Anyway, we'll go on, and I'll come up with the number that I want to give people that they can look up on the internet and see. And I don't know what I did with it.
Well, anyway, we have reports, the BRAC 2005, the 2012 EIR by the Navy. Both of them claim 160 years. Now, Mulvihill.
How do you pronounce it?
Former water district manager stated, and along with the current water district manager, Don Zadiva, stated, well, and Mr. Decker, stated that, well, that was not completely true. They got this from some other report, and that was based off of you have to do this, you have to do that in order to get 160 waters. But we'll talk about this more when we come back. We have to go to break, unfortunately, again. But join us as we finish up here talking about water with Mike Neill here on Ridgecrest Talk. And again, you should be at City Hall.
That's right.
Yes, that's right. Talking to the Planning Commission.
Join us when we come back. Welcome back, Thursday night edition of Ridgecrest Talk. Al Huey, along with my partner, Robert Eierman, and our guest, Mike Neill, talking about water. And you were frankly trying to find some information.
Yeah, well, anybody out there that would like to can go on the internet, their favorite search engine, and look up DCN, David Charlie Nancy, space 5935. And I don't have page numbers here, but you'll see that the statement put out for the BRAC Commission was that the Indian Wells Valley Water District has an annual water supply, on average, to keep the anticipated post-BRAC community in domestic water for over 160 years.
And on a previous document, not the final one, that
said
was 90,000
90,000 residents. And
90,000 residents for 160 years.
Right. And
now, did they lie to us?
Yeah.
No,
Oops.
they would never do that.
Never.
If they didn't lie, then what they're doing now
Must be a lie.
in particular, because they're in support of what the county's doing on this.
Oh, they pushed
They're
for
saying that, the sky's falling, we're running out of water. What message does that send to the rest of the country regarding China Lake NAS?
A bad one.
Yeah.
A terrible one. It's could be the death knell to this community.
If we have another BRAC in the next year or two, unless this is squashed right now, it's coffins for us.
Yeah, that's right. Because they're never going to want to send anybody here because the community is going to dry up and blow away. If you believe all of this. And our supervisor, Mick Gleason, was a commander out there on the base.
Right.
I supported him. Oh, well, everybody makes mistakes.
I didn't.
Yeah, a number of people did, and the agriculture people did. And they're all trying to reach the knife that's in their back.
Right.
And I know he's not doing this out of meanness or anything else. I firmly believe he thinks he's doing the right thing. But I hope he gets his head handed to him at the supervisors meeting.
And just so you know, there's probably not a lot of people on the other side of the hill that watch Ridgecrest Talk.
Right.
If you know anybody, you might want to give them a heads up. Our supervisor said that he wants to bring this or take this to the other side of
To the other side of the hill.
So,
he really is a brave guy,
you
isn't
farmers,
Tell
got
your
something
farming
to look
friends.
forward to.
Yeah, right.
You other supervisors, if you get word of this, if you support what Supervisor Gleason is doing here, it's coming to you soon.
And to your constituents, and I don't think they'll like it.
No, what I've heard, a lot of the constituents over there happen to be farmers, and they have supported those supervisors.
Yes.
This is really interesting to think the possibility, and this is something that's been noted as a pattern. Maybe they decided we're going to try this on the Indian Wells Valley as a test case.
Oh, no harm, no
So
foul.
that
Who cares about that?
If it's successful, then there's a precedent. They figured out all the ins and outs, how to go about it, and how to fight the people that resist it, and then take it and it start to spread across the rest of the state.
The News Review last week had an article titled "China Lake is a Case Study for Water Rights."
Exactly.
Yes.
It talks about Supervisor Gleason meeting with a commander of the Navy Southwest, Rear Admiral, Patrick Lorge, or Lorgay, and China Lake's Alliance Director, Jack Connell. And they talked about this. And there's some interesting quotes. Let me just grab a couple of them real quick here. And this is Supervisor Gleason speaking. He says, if you go back to BRAC 95 and 05, there were hiccups and rumors and allegations that China Lake was running out of water. Not a good place to relocate. Work too, said Connell. We kind of appropriately diffused that, but we started taking it seriously. I'm sorry, it wasn't Gleason, it was Connell that said that. And then later it was mentioned that the Army and the Air Force have a policy in place to determine the required information, but the Navy and the Marine Corps do not. As a result, the Office of Secretary of Defense is enforcing new regulations, and that was to determine how much water was available for the Army and the Air Force at these bases that they're located. The Navy and the Marines haven't done it yet, but they're going to be. And so do the GSAs, by the way. So why don't we wait for the GSAs and the Navy to do a case study on how much water we have instead of jumping off this bridge without all the information.
Absolutely. They're jumping off a cliff.
It's hard enough to think about what people are probably going to have to suffer if the drought continues, the mandates continue, and then think about people sitting at home thinking that they're going through all of this because somebody jumped the gun and imposed it on them instead of waiting for enough, well thought out studies and more tests. They've already talked about bringing Stanford University people in here to do more testing of the water, and that's all about figuring out what water is in the basin, where it came from, and is this
I thought that was
basin got recharged or
water?
No,
it's the characteristics of the water, which goes back to the chemical studies that have been done for decades around here to try to get a good idea of is there recharge and how much, and what's going on.
Where does it come from? Are we open? Are we closed? How much water do we lose if we're open basin? How much water can we bank if we're a closed basin?
Yes. And I say if the Navy is so interested in pushing for something like this because we're going to run out of water, let them spend some of this money that they extract from us by
Is this our last
boatload.
Uh-oh. We only have 20 seconds left.
Wow.
This is our last segment of our hour.
Time went by so fast.
Yeah. Phew.
Let me read real quick. I think I can get it in. This was a quote from Gleason at this meeting. We have not spent the money to properly or adequately find out how much water is left.
Then they need to do it.
I thought they did with the Todd report.
Obviously not.
That was rigged,
Yeah.
my opinion.
Well, we're out of time. Join us again next week when we'll probably be talking about water again. Thanks again, Mike, for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next week, folks.